This is part two of the Fundamentals of Academic Argument lecture. I just left off with a discussion of inductive reasoning and some of the errors that occur. A few others, we have exceptions to the rule. Sometimes there is a pattern that we'll see, but that we have to recognize that there can be exceptions to the rule. There can be times when things are different. So when we're aware of that, we need to qualify our claims in order to avoid overgeneralizations. For example, if we know that, maybe we think that most teenagers spend too much time on their cell phones, we have to be aware that some teenagers don't have cell phones, some have them but don't really spend a lot of time on them, and so on. Also, gaps in reasoning are something we want to avoid. That's when we have evidence and then a conclusion, and we don't really make the connection between the two. When you have evidence, you want to connect it to a reason and then to your claim. And then we have weak analogies, and this is comparing two specific examples that aren't really all that similar. So, for example, if you're talking about issues with gun restrictions, maybe having background checks, people might say, well, we don't do background checks for knives, and those are weapons as well. Some people might say, yeah, that's true, but there are differences between guns and knives that you'd want to consider, and so that might not be the strongest argument in that issue. Okay, so that takes us through deductive and inductive arguments or reasoning and brings us to the Tolman model, which is something else that you read about in the textbook. And we do have to talk about the Tolman model. It's actually on the list of requirements for Writing 122 for what I teach. But we're not going to get too hung up on the vocabulary. So hang in there with me as I cover this just a little bit, and then I'll talk about how I want to use this. So just a quick recap, some of the terms are the same. So claim, the thesis of the argument, that's the same in the Tolman model. And reasons are statements that support the claim. Where we break up the reasoning, though, that's a little bit different, is between reasons and warrants. And reasons in the Tolman model are those more fact-based or logic-based statements that support the claim. And then grounds is the term used for evidence that supports that logic-based reasoning and proves that, and therefore the claim. What's different in the Tolman model is that we have this term called warrants. And you've been discussing this a little bit as assumptions. These are often unstated, sometimes they are stated, and they fill in the gaps between an argument's reasoning and claim. These are the values and beliefs that people have or that the audience needs to share in order to accept the claim. So that's where Tolman's different. We're going to talk about reasoning that encompasses logic and values and beliefs just as reasoning, but in the Tolman model that's called warrants. And then of course we can have backing, which is evidence used to support the warrants and therefore the claim. And let's take a look at how this is structured. So we have the claim, which is built up by reasons and warrants, which is built up by grounds and backing in the Tolman model. Okay, and we'll break that down a little bit more in a minute. A couple of other terms we need to talk about, though, for the Tolman model. We have rebuttals, and those are refutations of or arguments against opposing views. And these are going to be really important this quarter because we'll look at, sometimes an argument will bring up opposing views but not really engage with them or not express them clearly. And then sometimes what's missing is a really logical argument to refute that opposing view. And sometimes you'll just accept the opposing view and you'll say, yes, that's true, but it's not as important as these other reasons. And sometimes you really just need to show, here's why that's not actually valid. And then we have qualifiers. And these often occur because of opposing views that we have to address. And these are statements that limit the claim. They're modifiers or concessions that make a claim more likely to be accepted by the audience. For example, if I were to say that many teenagers spend too much time on their cell phones and need to have better methods of balancing their time, just using that term many instead of kids these days or all teenagers really helps qualify that claim and can make it more acceptable to my audience. Okay, so let's take a couple of look at a couple of examples of how the Tolman model works, and this will really help you look at how you can develop strong support for an argument as well. So if we had the claim all smoking should be banned on TVC's campuses, we'd need reasoning to help support that. And one reason could be we need to eliminate non-smokers' exposure to harmful secondhand smoke. And that's often the most common reason. And for evidence for that, the grounds, we'd have evidence that secondhand smoke is harmful, the studies, the statistics, etc. We could even maybe have some people who say, you know, I have asthma, and when I am exposed to smoke, it sets off an asthma attack. We could have some other types of evidence, but we'd need some evidence. In the Tolman model, we could also have warrants or values or beliefs that are helping support the claim. So a warrant might be everyone has the right to breathe clean air, that we have that value. And to back that up, we could use the Declaration of Independence, which states everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So as a health risk, secondhand smoke threatens one's life to a healthy, or threatens one's right to a healthy life, and breathing unclear air threatens one's rights to liberty and happiness. And so we could use that. And like I said, this is how the Tolman model works. If you were thinking about an essay or an argument, or writing an essay or an argument, I would say you could use both of these as reasons, needing to limit exposure and having the right to breathe clean air. Okay. Another way we can look at this, because I don't want to be too biased on this, we could look at the claim smoking should not be banned on TVC's campuses. So we might say that that's because smoking is highly addictive, and preventing smokers from smoking while on campus will result in serious physical, mental, and emotional withdrawal symptoms that could hurt their academic performance. For evidence for that, we could have evidence of that those addictive properties and of how withdrawal works. So scientific studies, anecdotal evidence, etc. For the warrant, we could have banning smoking on public property as a violation of individual liberties. And again, we could back that up with the Declaration of Independence, which states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So banning smoking could eliminate one's right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. One more model of this that I want to look at is a compromise between the two, because I really don't want to get stuck on there being two extreme sides on every issue. I could say smoking should be allowed on TVCC's campuses, but only in designated smoking areas that provide provide cover and comfortable seating. So one reason could be a combination of the reasons I just talked about. Yes, secondhand smoke is harmful and smoking is unhealthy, which I'd want to provide evidence of. But for those who do smoke, being forced not to smoke results in withdrawal symptoms that could hurt their academic performance. And once again, I'd provide evidence of that as well. Then my warrant could be that we need to find a way to balance the individual liberties of smokers with the individual liberties of non-smokers. So my value would be trying to balance out the rights of everyone. And backing for this would be that allowing smoking only in designated areas that are comfortable allows the college to meet everyone's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as specified in the Declaration of Independence. And I could go back to those explanations I had above. Okay. So you can see how the Tolman model works. And like I said, you're not going to have to remember all of the vocabulary of this, but where this is really helpful is seeing how you can take different kinds of reasoning, different kinds of evidence, and combine it to create a really strong argument. And of course, we could have even more than what we have here. Okay. So this brings us to the elements of persuasion, the 4 types of rhetorical appeals: logos, ethos, pathos, and kairos. And notice there is a 4th appeal that isn't really discussed in the textbook. So first we have the appeal to logos, and this is related to logic, word, thought, and law. And the definition is an appeal to logic or reason. It refers to the expression of thought in language and an attempt to appeal to the intellect. In other words, any time in an argument someone is trying to make you think, trying to reason with you, or you're doing the same in your own arguments, that's an appeal to logos. And this is important because logos should be the foundation of an academic argument and other arguments as well. So political arguments, community arguments, all should be based in logic, because if there's no logic, then really the argument should fall apart very quickly. And we know, of course, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes people are focused on emotion, they're just reacting, but the logos is important, and we'll be focusing a lot of our attention on appealing to logos this quarter. So some examples of appeals to logos. We have the use of a strong argument structure. So having everything we've just been talking about, a clear claim, reasoning, evidence, strong deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, all of that is going to be really important, but also presenting it in an organizational pattern that's easy for readers to understand, that's clear, easy to follow, and so your reasoning doesn't get lost. Something else that's really important is avoidance of logical fallacies or errors in reasoning, and the textbook talks about those in a lot more detail. I did touch on some of those with inductive reasoning, but make sure that you're looking to the textbook and thinking about the discussion of logical fallacies as we go forward. Next, we have the appeal to ethos, and ethos is related to ethics. It's an appeal to credibility. It refers to the trustworthiness or credibility of a speaker or writer based on how others perceive his or her character. So in other words, with ethos, we're looking at how does an arguer try to make us trust him or her, and is he or she actually trustworthy, and how do we know that? And this is important because people are often just as concerned with who is making a claim as what the claim is. And that's not necessarily a good thing. We should question even people we trust. If it's, a politician we tend to agree with, for example, we should be questioning, we should be looking at the logic, we should be looking at any possibility of manipulation, but we want to be aware that this is really important in argument. And as we argue, we also want to make sure we present ourselves in a trustworthy way. And we're, of course, going to be very idealistic about this and assume that we're not trying to manipulate others. We're just trying to be trusted so that we can do the right thing. So some examples of appeals to ethos. One is building a reputation as someone who is trustworthy through time and experience. And this, of course, takes more time than you might have in a writing class, but in your real world context, if you have a career that requires being trustworthy, you decide to be a community leader and you want to build trustworthiness, this is something that's really important. And we also want to look at people's reputations. Have they been able to prove over and over again that they're trustworthy? And that will help us know if we should trust what they say or not. More temporarily, something you can do as you write arguments for class is you can use language to appear credible in the moment. And again, we don't want to manipulate people with this, but having an educated vocabulary, proofreading carefully, having a calm and reasonable tone, all of that can help. Also, showing one is knowledgeable about the issue, including other points of view, is really important. If you can show you've considered different perspectives and have addressed those fairly, that will help people trust you. Some other ways you can appeal to ethos. If you have a position of authority or personal experience with the issue, you can establish credibility that way. And that could be even something as simple as, being a college student who's been through the first year experience already, and you're making an argument to newcomers and you're using your personal experience. It doesn't have to be any major position of authority. Something else you can do is refer to respected and trusted people and draw some of their credibility into your argument. And this is where using sources is very helpful. You find sources that are credible, you draw on their information, and that makes you more credible. Of course, you have to cite your sources correctly in order to do that. If you don't cite your sources, you plagiarize, or you just don't show where your information comes from, then your audience is not going to be able to trust you. Okay. So almost out of time again, so I will put the rest of the lecture into a third video.